At 6:19 p.m., standing in front of the third cabinet in the Hartford County Courthouse records room, I held a brown folder in my hands. The ink from an old notary stamp was still clearly legible on it. Right at that moment, my phone rang. It was my mother, Eleanor Callahan, and without any pleasantries, she flatly said, "I have changed my will, and your name is no longer in it." I stood frozen. The paper in my hand was a durable power of attorney, signed by that very Eleanor Callahan 17 years ago, and its validity was technically still alive today. I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear, placed the folder on the table, and did not let my voice betray a single emotion. "All right," I said. "Thanks for letting me know. My name is Margaret Callahan. People call me Meg, and I am a municipal bond compliance auditor at the Hartford County Treasury Office. My job is to track where, how, and by whose signature public money moves. For 17 years, I have worked in a world of proxy signatures, escrow accounts, and expiry dates. And if there is one thing I have learned very well in this world, it is that people often forget the papers they themselves signed." My mother had forgotten. 17 years ago, when she needed emergency hip surgery, she handed this power of attorney to me, because at the time, I was the only one who understood hospital forms, who could talk to the insurance company, who could find the right place to sign on every single document. She never revoked it. Her lawyer forgot to file the renewal forms, and according to Connecticut proxy laws, unless a new document replaces it, the old authority does not expire. I hung up. The light in the records room was a pale yellow, and the air smelled of old paper and the faint heat radiating from a digital scanner. I put the folder in my bag casually, just like anyone would pack away a daily file. There were no tears. No shaking hands, just a calculation forming seamlessly in my head, exactly the way I track a discrepancy in a county budget, line by line, without rushing. 7 years ago, when I married Daniel O'Brien, my mother told me in no uncertain terms, "If you marry that man, you are dead to me." I married him anyway, and she kept her promise, cutting me out of every holiday, every birthday, and every family photo. But the one thing she never did was call her lawyer to ask if that old piece of paper was still valid. And for 7 years, I never reminded anyone either, because I had always been the one who quietly fixed everyone's mistakes, without taking credit, without complaining. But now, in this moment, under the pale yellow light of the courthouse, I realized that the thing I had never even thought of using was still entirely in my hands. If you also feel that the most reliable person in the family is often the most taken for granted, do not forget to like this story and tell us in the comments what you want to see happen next. I am Margaret Callahan, and my story has just begun. 7 years ago, on an August evening at exactly 7:30 p.m., sitting at my mother's dining table in the same Westport house where I grew up, she put down her teacup and told me, "If you marry that man, the doors of this house will be closed to you forever." That man's name was Daniel O'Brien. He was a high school physics teacher in a Bridgeport public school. He had no trust fund, no family name my mother could proudly drop at some country club. My mother's family, the Callahans, had been tied to the Hartford insurance business for 3 generations, and in her eyes, marriage was supposed to be a corporate merger, not a decision driven by love. I did not say anything that night. I finished my tea, put the cup in the kitchen sink, and walked out. That was my way, always. I did not argue. I did not yell to get my point across. I just did what I felt was right and filed everything else away inside me, complete with a timestamp, devoid of any sentimentality. 3 months later, on a Saturday in October, I married Daniel in a small New Haven courthouse in front of just 20 people. My mother was not there. My father, Henry Callahan, came, but quietly, without telling anyone, and left by evening, terrified my mother would find out. My younger brother, Ted, did not show up either. He sent me a text later that read, "Do not tell Mom I congratulated you." The week after the wedding, my mother called me. There was no anger in her voice, just a cold, calculated distance. She said, "I have removed your name from my healthcare proxy, and the next time a decision needs to be made for me, Ted will make it." I asked, "Why Ted, a guy who cannot even pay his own phone bill on time?" She did not answer. She just hung up. I was not surprised even then. It was the same pattern I had witnessed since childhood. Ted was forgiven. I was scrutinized. When Ted dropped out of college, my mother said, "Let him find his own path." When I decided to move to Boston for my first job, she said, "You only ever think about yourself." But I never raised my voice against this imbalance. I was the peacekeeper, the person who stayed calm in every family storm, the one who stepped in every time the finances got messy or the paperwork stalled, quietly smoothing things out. This habit was so deeply ingrained in me that it never even occurred to me to question why I always had to play this role. My life with Daniel was quiet and balanced. We bought a small house on the outskirts of Stamford, where he would leave for school every morning, and I for the county office. I would speak to my mother maybe 2 or 3 times a year, always on some obligatory occasion, always in that same freezing tone. I never apologized to her, and she never thawed. But what I did not know at the time was that the old power of attorney document signed 17 years ago, which I had never even thought of using, was still lying perfectly valid and active in a file in some lawyer's drawer. Over the next 5 years, I kept cleaning up every family mess my mother refused to look at, or that Ted created through sheer negligence. It was not a single incident. It was a pattern so regular that I eventually stopped keeping count. The first time it happened was when Ted missed 3 consecutive car loan payments. The bank threatened to send repo agents, and my mother called me and simply said, "You understand finance? Do something." That night, I read through Ted's loan documents, spoke to the bank's customer service department 3 times, filled out a hardship deferment form, and got the loan restructured for 6 months. Ted did not even thank me. My mother just said, "Good thing you handled it." The second time, it was a medical billing error for my dad, where his insurance company denied a crucial surgery under the wrong billing code. My mother did not understand billing codes, and Ted claimed he did not have the time. For 3 weeks, during every single lunch break, I battled the insurance company's appeals department, documented the medical coding error, and finally got the claim reversed. That appeal saved them $22,000. Nobody even mentioned it at the next family gathering. I had no complaints about doing this work, at least not back then. It had become second nature to me, much like my habit of fixing discrepancies in my auditing job without judging, without getting emotional. I would look at the problem, get to its root, solve it, and move on. No asking for credit, no complaining. But one thing was slowly becoming crystal clear. Every time I helped the family, my marriage was never brought up. It was as if Daniel had been erased from existence. For Thanksgiving dinner, my mother would invite my dad, Ted, and Ted's girlfriend, but she never asked if I would like to come. And whenever I called to ask myself, the answer was always the same. "The table is a bit tight this time, maybe next time." By the 5th year, I was starting to realize something I had never admitted out loud. I was a function to this family, not a person. When things went wrong, I was summoned. When there was something to celebrate, I was forgotten. And I was seeing all of this exactly the way I see an imbalance in a balance sheet, clear, cold, and devoid of drama. Daniel would sometimes ask me, "Why do you put up with this?" I would always give the same answer, "It is my family, and in a family, there are just some things you endure." I did not realize how hollow that answer was until it dawned on me that the peace I was keeping was not peace at all. It was just a price I was paying all by myself, without knowing how long this tab would keep running. In the winter of that year, on a December night, at exactly 9:43 p.m., I received a phone call that changed everything. It was not from my mother. It was a routine notice from her old lawyer, Mr. Hollister's office, sent out as part of a client file review every 5 years. And there was one line in that notice that stopped me dead in my tracks at the table. The notice was a simple formality, the kind every law firm sends out to old clients every 5 years to ask if the documents on file need updating. Mr. Hollister's secretary had emailed me this notice because 17 years ago, when this power of attorney was drafted, I was the secondary contact and my old email address was still on file. I read the email 3 times. It said, "Dear Ms. Callahan, this is a routine reminder that the durable power of attorney signed by Eleanor Callahan, dated the 17th of March, remains in an active status in our files. No revocation form has been received. Please confirm if this document should still be kept valid." I was sitting at my dining table at the time, a county budget report I had to submit the next day open in front of me, and my mind suddenly caught between 2 different worlds. On one hand was that email stating a technical, boring, legal fact. On the other hand was the memory of my mother telling me on the phone 5 years ago, "The next time a decision needs to be made for me, Ted will make it." She had no idea. She had absolutely no clue that the document she signed 17 years ago for an emergency surgery had never been revoked. Her new lawyer, whom she hired after our fallout over my marriage, probably assumed the old document automatically expired. Or maybe he never bothered to ask. It is a common misconception in business families. People think hiring a new lawyer automatically makes old paperwork vanish. The law does not work like that. I did not send a reply that night. I just saved the email to a folder, printed it, and filed it away with my office documents, right where I kept my own insurance papers and tax returns. I did not feel any sense of vengeance in that moment. I just felt a strange, profound calm. The kind of calm that washes over you when you finally locate a missing entry in a long, grueling audit. I also realized that the role I had been playing all these years was not just emotional. It was legal. I was the person who never demanded any paperwork rights, but I always had that right, without my knowledge, without my mother's knowledge, sitting quietly inside a forgotten file. I did not tell Daniel anything that night. It was not my style to share things immediately. I analyze the facts first, put them in their proper place, and only make a move when everything is crystal clear. The next day, during my lunch break, I went to the county law library and started reading up on Connecticut's proxy and power of attorney laws, exactly the way I would study a new municipal bond regulation. By the end of the week, I understood every single line of the law. Not only was the document valid, but its powers were so broad that it gave me absolute authority over every trust account, every investment portfolio, and every banking decision of my mother's, unless she revoked it herself, in writing, in front of a notary. This sentence echoed in my mind for weeks. I read every subsection of the Connecticut General Statutes from Section 1-350 to 1-353 3 times over, treating it like a prospectus for a municipal bond issue, noting every footnote, every exception, and every date. The clearest takeaway was this: to revoke this document, simply saying I do not want this anymore was not enough. My mother would have to sign a formal revocation form, get it notarized, and then send it to all the institutions where the original document was filed, namely her 3 banks, her brokerage firm, and the county recorder's office. She had never done that because she did not know she had to. On a February evening at exactly 5:03 p.m., sitting at my office desk in the last half hour after lunch, I took the first step of what I later realized was the true beginning. I called First Covenant National Bank, one of the 3 banks where I knew my mother kept her primary savings and a small investment account. Providing my account holder identification number, the old power of attorney number, and my own driver's license for verification, I simply asked, "Does my proxy access still show as active in the system?" The bank representative put me on hold, then came back and said, "Yes, ma'am. Your access is active at level 3, which includes account view, transaction approval, and beneficiary change authorization." I said thank you, hung up the phone, and added a new entry to an Excel sheet open on my screen, precisely how I document an audit finding: date, institution name, access level, and status. I did not do this out of revenge. At least, that is what I thought at the time. I just needed to know, out of professional curiosity, what was on the record and what was not. It was the same instinct that had made me a good auditor for 20 years. Verify every claim, never rely on assumptions. Over the next 2 weeks, I checked the other 2 institutions as well. At the brokerage firm, Piedmont Wealth Advisors, my access was restricted to level 2, view only. But at the 3rd bank, Connecticut River Savings, my access was fully active, just like at First Covenant. I did not change a thing. I merely filled out an updated contact information form, entering my current phone number and email, so that if any notifications were ever sent, they would reach me too, exactly as a secondary account holder should be notified. I finally told Daniel in late March, on a Sunday morning at the breakfast table, without any flair for the dramatic. I just told him, Mom's old power of attorney is still active, and I have it. He stayed quiet for a moment, then asked, "What are you going to do with it?" I replied, "Nothing right now. I just needed to know." That was not entirely true, but at the time, even I did not know if I was lying to myself. What was true was that for the first time in my life, I knew something my mother did not. Something that gave me a technical upper hand over her. Just like finding a hidden error in someone else's balance sheet that they themselves cannot see. I put that folder in the bottom drawer of my office desk, alongside other documents I rarely touched, but always knew were there. And then I started to wait, not knowing what I was waiting for, except that something, someday, was bound to happen. That wait lasted about 1.5 years. During that time, I did nothing but go about my daily routine, my job, my marriage, and those cold phone calls 2 or 3 times a year where my mother would simply ask, "Are you fine?" And I would answer, "Yes, how are you?" But I also used my professional habits to do something else. Every 3 months, exactly as I conduct a quarterly review of every county bond portfolio, I quietly called all 3 of my mother's financial institutions to check the status of my proxy access. It was not espionage, Certainly not legally, because every time I called, I provided my true identity and correct authorization number. It was just an audit, one I was running on myself, on my own standing. On an August afternoon, at exactly 12:26 p.m., a representative from First Covenant National Bank told me over the phone that there had been a recent update to the account. My mother had added a new co-signer. His name was Ted Callahan. But this update was strictly under Level 2 access, meaning view and deposit only, no withdrawal approval. My old Level 3 access was still perfectly active. Nowhere in the system did it say it should be altered or removed. I was not surprised by this. My mother had no idea that the system logs different tiers of authority separately. The old power of attorney and the new co-signer status did not overwrite each other unless someone specifically requested the old one to be removed. It was the exact same mistake I often see in my county audits, where people assume a new document automatically invalidates an old one, whereas in the eyes of the law, nothing changes unless everything is explicitly detailed in writing. That evening, I created a spreadsheet, just like the ones I make every week for work, with 3 columns: institution name, my access level, and the date last verified. I save this file not on my office laptop, but on my personal encrypted drive, right where I keep my own tax documents. It was not a conspiracy. It was just record keeping, the one thing I am best at. In September, my father suddenly fell ill, a mild cardiac event that landed him in St. Francis Hospital for 2 days. I did not get this news from my mother, but from my father's neighbor, who figured I ought to know. I rushed to the hospital that evening, but I was made to sit in the waiting room because my mother had told the nursing staff to only let immediate decision makers inside, and my name was not on that list. I sat there for about 3 hours amidst that distinct hospital smell, a mix of antiseptic and stale coffee, and I did not say a word. I did not argue with a nurse. I did not even text my mother demanding to be let in. I just sat there, acutely aware of the presence of that old folder in my bag, which now traveled with me everywhere at all times, without anyone knowing. That night, when I got home, Daniel asked me, "How do you stay so calm when they treat you like this?" I looked at him and said, "Because I know the score always settles eventually. It is just not time yet." In the last week of October, my dad came home from the hospital, slowly recovering, and everything in the family slipped back into the same old routine. The same distance, the same silence, the same 2 or 3 annual phone calls. But what had changed was that Ted, who had caught a glimpse of the family's finances after Dad's illness, suddenly made a massive mistake in an attempt to prove himself responsible. On a January morning at exactly 7:48 a.m., I got an automated alert from Connecticut River Savings, the very alert system I had set up myself months ago when updating my contact information. The alert read, "Large outgoing wire transfer pending. Account holder Eleanor Callahan. Amount $78,000. Destination a third-party investment platform." I instantly knew this was Ted's doing. I found out later he was trying to dump money into a crypto-linked real estate fund he had heard pitched on some podcast, convincing my mother it would double their retirement savings. My mother had given him co-signer access, level 2, which was fine for small sums, but for an amount this large, the bank system required a higher level of approval, which only I had. I did not panic that morning. I poured my coffee and, before leaving for the office, called the bank's secure line, provided my identification, and asked, "What is the status of this transaction?" The representative informed me it was on hold pending secondary approval because the system had flagged it as high risk. I said, "I want to keep this on hold. Please do not process it without my written authorization." At 6 p.m. that same evening, my mother called, and for the first time in years, there was panic in her voice. She said, "The bank is saying the transaction cannot go through without your approval. What kind of joke is this? What do you have to do with it?" I replied very calmly, "The power of attorney you signed 17 years ago was never revoked. It is still valid, and I still have it." There were a few seconds of dead silence on the other end of the line. Then she asked, "How long have you known this?" I said, "About 2 years." She asked, "Why did you not tell me?" And I gave her the answer I had been drafting in my head for months, not knowing if I would ever get the chance to say it out loud. "You never thought I was worth telling anything, so I did not think it was necessary to tell you everything either." After that night, my mother called me 3 more times, her tone shifting every time from furious to pleading, but I kept the transaction on hold until I had personally worked with the bank's fraud department to run a full background check on that investment platform. The investigation with the bank's fraud department took 3 days, and what we uncovered was worse than I expected. That crypto-linked real estate fund, called Pacific Crown Holdings, was actually an unregistered investment scheme with no valid filings with the SEC. If those $78,000 had been transferred, nearly 40% of my mother's retirement savings would have vanished into a black hole, almost impossible to recover. On a February afternoon, at exactly 2:11 p.m., I walked into the Hartford branch of First Covenant National Bank during my lunch break, dressed in my formal office wear, carrying the same folder that had been by my side for months. The branch manager, Mr. Donovan, recognized me as we had spoken on the phone twice before. I placed 3 documents on his desk: the original power of attorney, my ID, and the fraud department's report flagging Pacific Crown Holdings as high risk. I stated very clearly, I want to permanently cancel this transaction, and moving forward, my written authorization must be mandatory for any transaction over $20,000 from this account. Mr. Donovan reviewed the documents, entered them into the system, and within minutes the change was confirmed. There was no drama, no raised voices, just 2 forms, 3 signatures, and a timestamp. That same evening, my mother received an automated letter from the bank informing her that new security restrictions had been placed on the account at the request of the secondary power of attorney holder. She called me immediately, and this time, her voice was not panicked, but filled with a cold, stunned silence. She asked, "How did you do all this without asking me?" I replied, "I did not ask you because legally, I did not have to. The authority you gave me yourself 17 years ago, I simply used it to protect you, exactly the way I always have." She said nothing for a moment and then asked quietly, "What else do you have access to that I do not know about?" I did not give her a direct answer. I just said, "If you like, we can sit down and go through all the paperwork whenever you are ready." The call ended, and I knew this silence would not last long. I also knew that the conversation we were about to have would not just be about money. It would be about the 7 years of distance my mother had built herself, entirely unaware that even through all that distance, in the eyes of the law, I had never really left her life. The very next week, my mother sent me an email with a subject line that just read, "We should meet." And at the bottom of that email was an attachment. As soon as I opened it, I realized this meeting was not just going to be about the power of attorney. The attachment was a scanned photocopy, old, slightly blurry, but perfectly legible. It was a copy of my mother's original healthcare power of attorney file, the same 17-year-old document which she had personally requested from the archives of her former lawyer, Mr. Hollister's closed firm. Attached to it was a small note that simply read, "I found this last night. I thought you should see it too." We arranged to meet on a Saturday afternoon at exactly 1 p.m. in the same old Westport house, at the same dining table where, 7 years ago, she told me that if I married Daniel, the doors would be closed forever. This time, there was no tea on the table. Only that folder, mine and hers, placed right across from each other. My mother did not say anything at first. She just looked at both folders, then at me, and finally asked, "Did you do all this to get back at me?" I answered very calmly, "No. If I wanted revenge, I would have let that money bleed into Ted's scam, and then told you I could have saved you, but I chose not to do that. I just did what I have always done, kept the system in check." She asked, "Then why did you not tell me you had this power?" I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Because for 7 years, you made me feel like I had no place in this family, that my marriage made me unworthy of sitting at this table. If I had told you I still had this authority, you would have snatched it away immediately, just like you stripped me of your healthcare proxy, just like you cut my name out of your will." She sat in silence for a while. Then she said, in a very soft voice, "I thought I was punishing you, showing you that you were out of this family. I never realized that I was actually pushing away the one person who always held everything together." I did not reply. I chose to just sit across from her, offering no words of comfort, because false comfort has never been in my nature. She finally asked, "So what happens now?" I said, "You decide. If you want, we can draft a new, updated document that clearly states who has what authority, what Ted gets, what I get, all in writing, in front of a notary, so there is never any confusion again. It is your life. It is your decision." She nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, her voice lacked that freezing distance. Instead, there was an exhausted, honest acceptance. She said, "I owe you an apology for all these years." I replied, "An apology does not bring back lost time. But if you truly want to fix something, we can do it the right way, on paper. That is the one thing I have always been taught. Feelings can change, but documents do not, unless someone changes them themselves." We did not share a tearful embrace that day. No tears were shed. We simply spent the next 3 hours sitting together, reading through those papers, line by line, exactly the way I do in every audit, slowly, without rushing, ensuring that this time, absolutely nothing was left vague. For 3 hours at that dining table, we did what we had never done in 7 years. We sat together, without a third party mediating, and understood every piece of paper. I explained to my mother what was needed to draft a new, updated power of attorney, a signature in front of a notary, 2 witnesses, and then distributing copies to every bank and brokerage firm where the old document had been filed, eliminating any future confusion. On a March morning, at exactly 10:12 a.m., we were both sitting in a notary public's office in Hartford, instead of the Westport lawyer who had helped my mother draft the new document. In this new document, I was listed as the primary agent. Ted was named the secondary agent, strictly for emergency healthcare decisions, with no financial authority. This was not revenge. It was simply the arrangement that should have been in place years ago had emotions not clouded the facts. As soon as the notary stamped the paper, my mother picked up the old folder, that 17-year-old document, and manually attached the official revocation form to it. She looked at me and said, "This old authority is gone now, but what you held together all these years, that will never be gone." I just nodded. I did not need an emotional response because the facts were speaking for themselves. That Thanksgiving, Daniel and I went to the Westport house for the first time, our first visit in 7 years. Ted was there too, a little awkward, but polite. No one brought up the old distance, nor did anyone perform any formal ritual of apology. We just sat together at the table, like a normal family, without knowing how much paperwork behind the scenes had made this moment possible. Now, looking back, I realize I never took revenge on my mother. I just did what I had always done. Put every file in its right place, verified every document to its true standing, without letting emotions overpower the truth. The only difference was that this time, at long last, I exercised the same caution for myself that I had been exercising for others for years. If you have made it this far, it means this story resonated with you. At Storyhaven Daily, we will keep bringing you true, quiet, yet profound stories just like this one. So subscribe to the channel, like this video, and let us know in the comments which part of this story will stay with you the most. We will be back soon with another story. And before you go, just remember this. Keeping the peace is not peace. It is just rent we pay at the cost of our own self-respect. From Storyhaven Daily, until next time, take care.